Chapter 6 The Battle for Deliverance from the Mother, where now comes a pause in the production of visions by Miss Miller. Then the activity of the unconscious is resumed very energetically. A forest with trees and bushes appear. After the discussion in the preceding chapter, there is need only of a hint that the symbol of the forest coincides essentially with the meaning of the holy tree. The holy tree is found generally in a sacred forest enclosure or in the Garden of Paradise. The sacred grove often takes the place of a taboo tree and assumes all the attributes of the latter. The erotic symbolism garden is generally known. The forest, like the tree, has mythologically a maternal significance. In the vision which now follows, the forest furnishes the stage upon which the dramatic representation of the end of the Chihuahuatel is played. This act therefore takes place in or near the mother. First I will give the beginning of the drama as it is in the original text. Up to the first attempt at sacrifice. At the beginning of the next chapter, the reader will find the continuation, the monologue, and the sacrificial scene. The drama begins as follows. The personage Chihuahua came from the south on horseback, around him a cloak of vivid colors, red, blue, and white. An Indian in a costume of doe skin covered the beads and ornamented with feathers advances, squats down and prepares to let an arrow at Chihuahua. The latter presents his breast in an attitude of defiance, and the Indian, fascinated by the sight, slinks away and disappears within the forest. The hero Chihuahua appears on horseback. This fact seems of importance because, as the further course of the drama shows, the horse plays no indifferent role but suffers the same death as the hero, and even is called the faithful brother by the latter. These allusions point to a remarkable similarity between horse and rider. There seems to exist an intimate connection between the two which guides them to the same destiny. We already have seen that the symbolization of the libido and resistance through the terrible mother in some places runs parallel with the horse. Strictly speaking, it would be innocent to say that the horse is or means the mother. The mother idea is a libido symbol, and the horse is also a libido symbol, and at some points the two symbols intersect in their significances. The common feature of the two ideas lies in the libido, especially in the libido repressed from incest. The hero and the horse appear to us in the setting like an artistic formation of the idea of humanity, with its repressed libido, whereby the horse acquires the significance of the animal unconscious, which appears domesticated and subjected to the will of man. Agni upon the ram, Wotan upon Sleipnir, Ahasma upon A, Yahweh upon the monstrous Serpa, Christ upon the ass, Dionysus upon the ass, Mithra upon the horse, men upon the human-footed horse, Freyr upon the golden bristled boar, etc. are parallel representations. The chargers of mythology are always invested with great significance. They very often appear anthropomorphized. Thus men's horse has human forelegs, the lamb's ass human speech, the retreating bull, upon whose back Mithra springs in order to strike him down, is, according to a Persian legend, actually the god himself. The mock crucifix of the Palatine represents the crucified with an ass's head, perhaps in reference to the ancient legend that in the Temple of Jerusalem the image of an ass was worshipped. As Drosselbart's horse's mane, Wotan is half human, half horse. An old German riddle very prettily shows this unity between horse and horseman. Who are the two who travel to Thing? Together they have 3 eyes, 10 feet, and 1 tail, and thus they travel over the land. Legends ascribe properties to the horse which psychologically belong to the unconscious of man. Horses are clairvoyant and clairaudient. They show the way when the lost wanderer is helpless. They have manic powers. In the Iliad, the horse prophesies evil. They hear the words which the corpse speaks when it is taken to the grave, words which men cannot hear. Caesar learned from his human-footed horse, probably taken from the identification of Caesar with Ephesian men, that he was to conquer the world. An ass prophesies to Augustus the victory of Actium. The horse also sees phantoms. All these things correspond to typical manifestations of the unconscious. Therefore, it is perfectly intelligible that the horse, as the image of a wicked animal component of man, has manifold connections with the devil. The devil has a horse's foot, in certain circumstances a horse's form. At crucial moments he suddenly shows a cloven foot, proverbial in the same way as in the abduction of Hatting. Sleipnir suddenly looked out from behind Wotan's mantle. Just as the nightmare rides on the sleepers, so does the devil, and therefore it is said that those who have nightmares are ridden by the devil. In Persian lore, the devil is the steed of God. The devil, like all evil things, represents sexuality. Witches have intercourse with him, in which case he appears in the form of a goat or horse. The unmistakably phallic nature of the devil is communicated to the horse as well. Hence this symbol occurs in connection where this is the only meaning which would furnish an explanation. It is to mention that Loki generates in the form of a horse, just as does the devil when in horse's form as an old fire god. Thus the lightning was represented pharamorphically as a horse. An uneducated hysteric told me as a child she had suffered from extreme fear of thunder, because every time the lightning flashed she saw immediately afterwards a huge black horse reaching upwards as far as the sky. It is said in a legend that the devil, as the divinity of lightning, casts a horse's foot, lightning upon the roofs. In accordance with the primitive meaning of thunder as fertilizer of the earth, the phallic meaning is given both to lightning and the horse's foot. In mythology, the horse's foot really has the phallic function as in this dream. An uneducated patient who originally has been violently forced to coitus by her husband very often dreams after separation that a wild horse springs upon her and kicks her in the abdomen with his hind foot. Plutarch has given us the following words of a prayer from Dionysus Orgies. Pegasus with his foot strikes out of the earth the spring Hippocrene. Upon a Corinthian statue of Bellerophon, which was also a fountain, the water flowed out from the horse's hoof. Balder's horse gave rise to a spring through this kick. Thus the horse's foot is the dispenser of fruitful moisture. A legend of Lower Austria, told by J., informs us that a gigantic man on a white horse is sometimes seen riding over the mountains. This means a speedy rain. In the German legend, the goddess of birth, Frau Ha, appears on horseback. Pregnant women near confinement are prone to give oats to a white horse from their aprons, and to pray him to give them a speedily delivery. It was originally the custom for the horse to rub against a woman's genitals. The horse, like the ass, had in general the significance of a pre-epic animal. Horses' tracks are idols, dispensing blessing and fertility. Horses' tracks established a claim and were of significance in determining boundaries, like the preapse of Latin antiquity. Like the phallic dactyl, a horse opened the mineral riches of the Harz Mountains with his hoof. The horseshoe, an equivalent of a horse's foot, brings luck and has apatratic meaning. In the Netherlands, an entire horse's foot is hung up in the stable to ward against sorcery. The analogous effect of the phallus is well known, hence the phalli at the gates. In particular, the horse's leg turned lightning aside, according to the principle simila similibus. Horses also symbolize the wind. That is to say, the tertium comparisons is again the libido symbol. The German legend recognizes the wind as the wild huntsman in pursuit of the maiden. Stormy regions frequently derive their names from horses, as the White Horse Mountain of Lunenburg Health. The centaurs are typically wind gods and have been represented such by Bachland's artistic intuition. Horses also signify fire and light. The fiery horses of Halos are an example. The horses of Hector are called Xanthos, Yellow Bright, Podagerous, Swift-footed Lampos, which is shining, Aphon, which is burning. A very pronounced fire symbolism was represented by the mythic quadriga mentioned by Dio Chrysostomus. The supreme god always drives his chariot in a circle. 4 horses are harnessed to the chariot. The horse driven on the periphery moves very quickly. He has a shining coat and bears upon it the sign of the planets and the zodiac. This is a representation of a rotary fiery of heaven. The second horse moves more slowly and is illuminated only on one side. The third moves still more slowly, and the fourth rotates around himself. But once the outer horse set the second horse on fire with his fiery breath, and the third flooded the fourth with his streaming sweat. Then the horses dissolve and pass into the substance of the strongest and most fiery, which now becomes the charioteer. The horses also represent the 4 elements. The catastrophe signifies the conflagration of a world and the deluge, whereupon the division of the god into many parts ceases, and the divine unity is restored. Doubtless, the quadrigae may be understood astronomically as a symbol of time. We already saw in the first part that the Stoic representation of fate is a fire symbol. It is therefore a logical continuation of the thought when time closely related to the conception of destiny exhibits the same libido symbolism. The morning glow virally in his head of the sacrificial horse, the sun in his eye, the wind in his breath, the all-spreading fire in his mouth. The year is the belly of the sacrificial horse. The sky is his back, the atmosphere the cavern of his body, the earth the vault of his belly. The poles are his sides, and between the poles his ribs, the seasons his limbs, the months and fortnights his joints. Day and night are his feet, stars his bones, clouds his flesh. The food he digests in the deserts, the rivers are his veins, the mountains his liver and lungs, the herbs and the trees his hair, the rising sun is his forepart, the setting sun his afterpart, the ocean is his kinsman, the sea his cradle. The horse undoubtedly here stands for a time symbol, and also for the entire world. We come across in the Mithritic religion a strange god of time, Aeon, called Kronos or Deus Leon Tachyphalos. He is a stereotyped representation as a lion-headed man who, standing in a rigid attitude, is uncoiled by a snake whose head projects forward from behind over the lion's head. The figure holds in each hand a key. On the chest rests a thunderbolt. Upon his back are the 4 wings of a wind. In addition to that, the figure sometimes bears the zodiac on his body. Additional attributes are on a cock and implements. In the Carolingian Psalter of Utrecht, which is based upon ancient models, the SA is represented as a naked man with a snake in his hand. As is suggested by the name of the divinity, he is a symbol of time, most interestingly composed from libido symbols. The lion, the zodiac sign of the greatest summer heat, is the symbol of the most mighty desire. My soul roars with the voice of a hungry lion, says Metcalde of Magdeburg. In the Mithra mystery, the serpent is also antagonistic to the lion, corresponding to that very universal myth of the battle of the sun with the dragon. In the Egyptian Book of the Dead, Tum is even depicted as a he-cat because as such he fought the snake, Apophis. The uncoiling also means the engulfing, the entering into the mother's womb. Thus time is defined by the rising and setting of the sun, that is to say, through the death and renewal of the libido. The addition of a cock against suggests time, and the addition of implements suggests a creation through time. Ormazades and Anaheim were produced through Z, the infidelity long duration. Time, this empty and purely formal concept, is expressed in the mysteries by transformations of the creative power, the libido. In Ferdusi, time is often a symbol of fate, the libido nature of which we have already learned to recognize. The Hindu text mentioned above includes still more its symbol of a horse, contains the whole world. His kinsman in his cradle in the sea, his mother similar to the world soul, the maternal significance of which we have seen above. Just as Aeon represents the libido in an embrace, that is to say in the state of death and of rebirth, so here the cradle of a horse is the sea, i.e. the libido, is in the mother dying and rising again, like the symbol of a dying and resurrected Christ who hangs like ripe fruit upon the tree of life. We have already seen that the horse is connected through Yargasil with the symbolism of a tree. The horse is also a tree of death, thus in the Middle Ages the funeral pyre was called St. Michael's horse, and the Neo-Persian word for coffin means wooden horse. The horse has also the role of psychopompos. He is the steed to conduct the souls of the other world. Horsewomen fetch the souls or Valkyries. Neo-Greek songs represent Charon on a horse. These definitions obviously lead to the mother symbolism. The Trojan horse was the only means by which the city could be conquered. It is only he who has entered the mother and has been reborn in an invincible hero. The Trojan horse is a magic charm like the knot of fear, which also serves to overcome a necessity. The formula evidently reads, in order to overcome the difficulty, thou must commit incest, and once more be born from thy mother. It appears that striking a nail into the sacred tree signifies something very similar. The Stock im Eisen in Vienna seems to have been such a palladium. Still another symbolic form is to be considered. Occasionally the devil rides upon a three-legged horse. The goddess of death, Hel, in the time of pestilence, also rides upon a three-legged horse. The gigantic ass, which is three-legged, stands in the heavenly rain, Lake Vokasha. His urine purifies the water of a lake, and from his roar all useful animals become pregnant, and all harmful animals miscarry. The triad further points to the phallic significance. The contrasting symbolism of Hel is blended into one conception in the ass of Vorakasha. The libido is fructifying as well as destroying. These definitions as a whole plainly reveal the fundamental features. The horse is a libido symbol, partly of phallic, partly of maternal significance, like the tree. It represents the libido in this application, that is, the libido repressed through the incest prohibition. In the Miller drama, an Indian approaches a hero ready to shoot an arrow at him. Chihuatapal, however, with a proud gesture exposes his breast to the enemy. This idea reminds the author to scarce between Cassius and Brutus in Shakespeare's Julius and Caesar. A misunderstanding has arisen between the two friends when Brutus reproaches Cassius for withholding from him the money of the legions. Cassius, irritable and angry, breaks out into the complaint. Come, Anthony and young Octavius, come, revenge yourself alone on Cassius. For Cassius is aweary of the world, hated by one he loves, braved by his brother. Checked like a bondman, all his faults observed, set in a notebook, learned and conned by rote. To cast into my teeth, oh, I could weep. My spirit from mine eyes, there is my dagger. And here my naked breasts within a heart, dearer than Plutus is mine, richer than gold. If that If that thou be'st a Roman, take it forth. I that denied thee gold will give my heart. Strike as thou didst at Caesar, for I know when thou didst hate him worse, thou lovest him better than ever thou lovest Cassius. The material here would be incomplete without mentioning the fact that this speech of Cassius shows many analogies to the agonized delirium of Cyrano. Only Cassius is far more theatrical and overdrawn. Something childish and hysterical is in his manner. Brutus does not think of killing him, but administers a very chilling rebuke in the following dialogue. Brutus, sheathe your dagger, be angry when you will. It shall have scope. Do what you will, dishonor shall be humor. O Cassius, you are yoked with a lamb, that carry your anger as the flint bears fire, who much in force shows a hasty spark, and straight is cold again. Cassius, half Cassius lived to be with the myth and laughter to this Brutus, when grief and blood ill-tempered vexed him. Brutus, when I spoke that, I was ill-tempered too. Cassius, do you confess so much? Give me your hand. Brutus, and my heart too. Cassius, oh Brutus. Brutus, what's the matter? Cassius, have not you love enough to bear with me, when that rash humor which my mother gave me makes me forgetful? Brutus, yes, Cassius, and from henceforth, when you are over, earns your Brutus. He'll think your mother chides and leave you so. The analytic interpretation of Cassius's irritability plainly reveals that at these moments he identifies himself with a mother, and his conduct therefore is truly feminine, as his speech demonstrates most excellently. There is womanish love-seeking and desperate subjection under the proud masculine will of Brutus, calls forth the friendly remark of the latter, that Cassius is yoked with a lamb, that is to say, has something very weak in his character which is derived from a mother. One recognizes in this without any difficulty the analytic hallmarks of an infantile disposition, which as always is characterized by a prevalence of apparent imago. Here the mother imago, an infantile individual, is infantile because he has freed himself insufficiently or not at all from a childish environment. That is, from his adaptation to his parents. Therefore, on one side he reacts falsely towards the world, as a child towards his parents, always demanding love and immediate reward for his feelings. On the other side, on account of the close connection to the parents, he identifies himself with them. The infantile individual behaves like the father and mother. He is not in a condition to live for himself and to find the place to which he belongs. Therefore Brutus very justly takes it for granted that the mother chides in Cassius, not he himself. The psychologically valuable fact which we gather here in the information that Cassius is infantile and identified with the mother. The hysterical behavior is due to the circumstances that Cassius is still, in part, a lamb and an innocent, entirely harmless child. He remains, as far as his emotional life is concerned, still far behind himself. This we often see among people who as masters apparently govern life and fellow creatures. They have remained children in regard to the demands of their love nature. The figures of the melodramas, being children of the creator's fantasy, depict as natural those traits of character which belong to the author. The hero, the wish figure, is represented as most distinguished, because the hero always combines in himself all wished-for ideals. Cyrano's attitude is certainly beautiful and impressive. Cassius's behavior has a theatrical effect. Both heroes prepare to die effectively, in which attempt Cyrano succeeds. This attitude betrays a wish for death in the unconscious of our author, the meaning of which we have already discussed at length as the motive for her poem of the moth. The wish of young girls to die is only an indirect expression which remains a pose, even in case of real death, for death itself can be a pose. Such an outcome merely adds beauty and value to the pose under certain conditions. That the highest summit of life is expressed through the symbolism of death is a well-known fact, for creation beyond oneself means personal death. The coming generation is the end of the preceding one. The symbolism is frequent in erotic speech. Lascivious speech between luscious and a wanton servant maid and Apuleius' metamorphosis is one of the clearest examples. The symbolism is extremely significant because it shows how easily a contrasting expression originates and how equally intelligible and characteristic such an expression is. The proud gesture with which the hero offers himself to death may very easily be an indirect expression which challenges the pity or sympathy of the other, and thus is doomed to the calm analytic reduction to which Brutus proceeds. The behavior of Chihuahua is also suspicious. Yes, the Cassius scene which serves as its model betrays indiscreetly that the whole affair is merely infantile and one which owes its origin to an overactive mother imago. When we compare this piece with the series of mother symbols brought to light in the previous chapter, we must say that the Cassius scene merely confirms once more that we have long supposed, that is to say, that the motor power of these symbolic visions arises from an infantile mother transference, that is to say, from an unattached bond to the mother. In the drama of the libido, in contradistinction to the inactive nature of the previous symbols, assumes a threatening activity, a conflict becoming evident, in which the one part threatens the other with murder. The hero, as the ideal image of a dreamer, is inclined to die. He does not fear death. In accordance with the infantile character of this hero, it would most surely be time for him to take his departure from the stage, or in childish language, to die. Death is to come to him in the form of an arrow wound. Considering the fact that the heroes themselves are very often great archers or succumb to an arrow wound, Saint Sebastian as an example, it may not be superfluous to inquire into the meaning of death through an arrow. We read in a biography of a stigmatized nun, Catherine Emmerich, the following description of the evidently neurotic sickness of her heart. When only in her naivety she received as a Christmas present from the Holy Christ a very tormenting heart trouble for the whole period of her nun's life. God showed her inwardly the purpose. It was on account of the decline of the spirit of the order, especially for the sins of her fellow sisters. But what rendered this trouble most painful was the gift which she had possessed from youth, namely to see before her eyes the inner nature of man as he really was. She felt the heart trouble physically as if her heart was continually pierced by arrows. These arrows, and this represented the still whose mental suffering she recognized as thoughts, plots, secret speeches, misunderstandings, scandals, and uncharitableness, in which her fellow sisters, wholly without reason and unscrupulously, were engaged against her and her God-fearing way of life. It is difficult to be a saint because even a patient and long-suffering nature will not readily bear such a violation, and defends itself in its own way. The companion of sanctity is temptation, without which no true saint can live. We know from analytic experience that these temptations can pass unconsciously, so that only their equivalents could be produced in consciousness in the form of symptoms. We know that it is the proverbial that heart and smart, hers and sherm rhyme. It is a well-known fact that hysterics put a physical pain in place of a mental pain. The biographer of Emmerich has comprehended that very correctly. Only her interpretation of a pain is as usual projected. It is always the others who secretly assert all sorts of evil things about her, and this she pretended gave her the pains. The case, however, bears a somewhat different aspect, the very difficult renunciation of all life's joys. This death before the bloom is generally painful, and especially painful are the unfilled wishes and the attempts of the animal nature to break through the power of repression. The gossip and jokes of the sisters very naturally center around the most painful things, so that it must appear to the saint as if her symptoms were caused by this. Naturally, again, she could not know that gossip tends to assume the role of the unconscious, which, like a clever adversary, always aims at the actual gaps in our armor. A passage from Buddha embodies this idea. A wish earnestly desired, produced by will and nourished when gradually it must be thwarted, burrows like an arrow in the flesh. The wounding and painful arrows do not come from without through gossip, which only attacks externally, but they can't come from ambush from our own subconscious. This, rather than anything external, creates the defenseless suffering. It is our own repressed and unrecognized desires which fester like arrows in our flesh. In another connection, this was clear to the nun, and that most likely it is a well-known fact and one which needs no further proof of those who understand, that these mystic scenes of union with the Savior generally are intermingled with an enormous amount of sexual libido. Therefore, it is not astonishing that the scene of the stigmata is nothing but an incubation through the Savior, only slightly changed metaphorically, as compared with the ancient conceptions of unio mystica, as cohabitation with the gods. Emmerich relates the following of her stigmatization. I had a contemplation of the sufferings of Christ, and implored him to let me feel with him his sorrows, and prayed 5 paternosters to the honors of life's sacred wounds. Lying on my bed with outstretched arms, I entered into a great sweetness, and into an endless thirst for the torments of Jesus. Then I saw a light descending upon me. It came obliquely from above. It was a crucified body, living and transparent, with arms extended, but without a cross. The wounds shone brighter than the body. They were 5 circles of glory coming forth from the whole glory. I was enraptured, and my heart was moved with great pain, and yet with sweetness from longing to share in the torments of my Savior. And my longing for the sorrows of a Redeemer increased more and more on gazing on his wounds, and passed from my breast, through my hands, sides, and feet to his holy wounds. Then from the hands, then from the sides, then from the feet of the figure, 3-fold shining red beams, ending below in an arrow, shot forth to my hands, sides, and feet. The beams, in accordance with the phallic fundamental thought, are 3-fold, terminating below in an arrow point. Like Cupid the sun, too, has its quiver full of destroying or fertilizing arrow sun rays, which possess phallic meaning. On this significance evidently rests the Oriental custom of designating brave sons as arrows and javelins to the parents. To make sharp arrows is an Arabian expression for to generate brave sons, the Psalms declare. Like as the arrows in the hands of a giant, even so are the young children. Comparable with this remarks previously made about boys. Because of the significance of the arrow, it is intelligible why the Scythian king, Ariates, when he wished to prepare a census, demanded an arrowhead from each man. A similar meaning attaches equally to the lance. Men are descended from the lance because the ash is the mother of lances. Therefore the men of an iron age are derived from her. The marriage custom to which Ovid alludes, Comet Virginius Hosta Recurva Comus, has already been mentioned. Cainus issued a command that his lance be honored. Pindar relates in the legend of Cainus. He descended into the depths, splitting the earth with a straight foot. He's said to have originally been a maiden named Canis, who became of her complacence, was transformed into an invulnerable man by Poseidon. Ovid pictures the battle of the Lapith with the invulnerable Cainus, At last they covered him completely with trees, as they could not otherwise touch him. Ovid says at this place, Roscher considers the bird to be the golden plover, Charitus pulvitis, which borrows its name from the fact that it lives in a crevice in the earth. By this song he proclaims the approaching rain. Kindness was changed into this bird. We see again in this little myth the typical constituents of a libido myth, originally bisexuality, immortality, or invulnerability, though entrance into the mother's or the splitting the mother of the foot and to become covered up, and resurrection as a bird of the soul and bringer of fertility, or the ascending sun. When this type of hero causes his lance to be worshipped, it probably means that his lance is a valid and equivalent expression of himself. From our present standpoint, we understand in a new sense the passage in Job, which I mentioned in chapter 4 of the first part of the book. He has set me up for his mark. His archers compass me around about. He cleaveth my reins asunder, and doth not spare. He poureth out my gall upon the ground. He breaketh me with breach upon breach. He runneth upon me like a giant. Now we understand this symbolism as an expression for the soul torment caused by the onslaught of the unconscious desires. The libido festers in his flesh. A cruel god has taken possession of him and pierced him with his painful libidian projectiles with thoughts, which overwhelmingly pass through him. As a dementia precox patient once told me this during his recovery, today a thought suddenly thrust itself through me. The same idea is found again in Ezech and Zephora, the magician. Stretched out shivering like one half dead whose feet are warmed, shaken alas, by unknown fevers, trembling from the icy pointed arrows of frost, haunted by thee, O thought, unutterable veiled horrible one, thou huntsman behind the clouds, struck to the ground by thee, thou mocking eye that gazeth at me from the dark. Thus do I lie, bending, riving, tortured with all eternal tortures, smitten by thee, crudest huntsman, thou unfamiliar god. Smite deeper, smite once more, pierce through and rend my heart. What meaneth this torturing with blunt-toothed arrows? Why gazeth thou again, never weary of human pain? With malicious god-lighting eyes, thou wilt not kill, but torture. No long drawn-out explanation is necessary to enable us to recognize in this comparison the old universal idea of a martyred sacrifice of God, which we have met previously in the Mexican sacrifice of the cross and in the sacrifices of Odin. The same conception faces us in the often repeated martyrdom of Saint Sebastian, where in the delicate glowing flesh of a young god, all the pain of renunciation, which has been felt by the artist, has been portrayed. An artist always embodies in his artistic work a portion of the mysteries of his time. In a heightened degree, the same is true of the principal Christian symbol, the crucified one pierced by the lance, the conception of a man of Christian era, tormented by his wishes, crucified and dying in Christ. This is not torment which comes from without, which befalls mankind, but that he himself is the hunter, murderer, sacrificer, and sacrificial knife is shown us in another art of Ezech poems, wherein the apparent dualism is transformed into the soul conflict, though the use of the same symbolism. O Zephora, most cruel Nimrod, Wilhelm hunter of God, the snare of all virtue, an arrow of evil. Now hunted by thyself, thine own prey pierced through thyself, now alone with thee, twofold in thine own knowledge, mid 100 mirrors, false to thyself, mid 100 memories, uncertain, ailing with each wound, shivering with each frost, caught in thine own snares, self-knower, self-hangman. Why didst thou strangle thyself with the noose of thy wisdom? Why hast thou enticed thyself into the paradise of the old serpent? Why hast thou crept into thyself? The deadly arrows do not strike the hero from without, but it is he himself who in disharmony with himself hunts, fights, and tortures himself. Within himself will has turned against will, libido against libido. Therefore the poet says, pierced through by self, that is to say, wounded by his own arrow. Because we have discerned that the arrow is a libido symbol, the idea of penetrating or piercing through consequently becomes clear to us. It is a phallic act of union with oneself, a sort of self-fertilization or introversion, also a self-violation, a self-murder. Therefore Zephyra may call himself his own hangman like Odin, who sacrifices himself to Odin. The wounding by one's own arrows means first of all the state of introversion. What this signifies we already know. The libido sinks into its own depths, a well-known comparison of Nietzsche, and finds there below in the shadows of the unconscious the substitute for the upper world, which it has abandoned. The world of memories, 100 memories, the strongest and most influential of which are the early infantile memory pictures. It is the world of the child, this paradise-like state of earliest childhood from which we are separated by a hard law. In this subterranean kingdom slumbers sweet feelings of home and the endless hopes of all that is to be. As Heinrich in The Sunken Bell by Gerrit Hauptmann says, in speaking of his miraculous work, there is a song lost and forgotten. A song of home, a love song of childhood brought up from the depths of a fairy well, known to all but yet unheard. However, as Mephistopheles says, the danger is great. These depths are enticing, they are the mother in death. When the libido leaves the bright upper world, whether from the decision of the individual or from decreasing life force, then it sinks back into its own depths, into the source from which it has gushed forth, and turns back to that point of cleavage, the imbeciles through which it once entered into the body. This point of cleavage is called the mother because from her comes the source of the libido. Therefore, when some great work is to be accomplished, before which weak man recoils, doubtful of his strength, his libido returns to that source. And this is the dangerous moment in which this decision takes place between annihilation and new life. If the libido remains arrested in the wonder kingdom of the inner world, then the man has become for the world above a phantom, then he is practically dead or desperately ill. But if the libido succeeds in tearing itself loose and pushing up into the world above, then a miracle appears. This journey to the underworld has been a fountain of youth, and new fertility springs from his apparent death. This train of thought is very beautifully gathered into a Hindu myth. Once upon a time, Vishnu sank into an ecstasy, introversion, and during this state of sleep, or Brahma, who enthroned upon the lotus flower, arose from the navel of Vishnu, bringing with him the Vedas, which he diligently read. Birth of creative thought from introversion. But through Vishnu's ecstasy, a devouring flood came upon the world. Devouring through introversion, symbolizing the danger of entering into the mother of death. A demon taking advantage of the danger stole the Vedas from Brahma and hid them in the depths. Devouring of the libido. Brahma roused Vishnu in the latter, transforming himself into a fish, plunged into the flood, fought with the demon, battled with the dragon, conquered with him, and recaptured the Vedas, treasure obtained with difficulty. Self-concentration and the strength derived therefrom correspond to this primitive train of thought. It also explains numerous sacrificial and magical rites which we have already fully discussed. Thus the impregnable Troy falls because the besiegers creep into the belly of a wooden horse. For he alone is a hero who is reborn from the mother like the sun. But the danger of this venture is shown by the history of Philoctetes, who was the only one in the Trojan expedition who knew the hidden sanctuary of Chryse, where the Argonauts had sacrificed already, and where the Greeks planned to sacrifice in order to assure a safe ending to their undertaking. Christ was a nymph upon the island of Christ, according to the accounts of the scholars and Sophocles' philosophies. This nymph loved Philosophes and cursed him because he spurred her love. This characteristic projection, which is also met in the Gilgamesh epic, would be referred back as suggested to the repressed incest wish of the son, who is repressed for the projection, as if a mother had the evil wish for the refusal of which the son was given over to death. In reality, however, the son became mortal by separating himself from the mother. His fear of death therefore corresponds to the repressed wish to turn back to the mother, and causes him to believe that the mother threatens or pursues him. The teleological significance of the fear of persecution is evident. It is to keep son and mother apart. The curse of Chryse is realized insofar that Philoctetes, according to one version, when approaching his altar, injured himself in his foot with one of his own deadly poisonous arrows, or according to another version. This is better and far more abundantly proven, was bitten in his foot by a poisonous serpent. From then on he is ailing. This very typical wound, which also destroyed Re, is described in the following manner in the Egyptian hymn. The ancient of the gods moved his mouth, he cast his saliva upon the earth, and what he spat fell upon the ground. With her hands Isis kneaded that in the soil which was about it together. From that she created a venerable worm, and made him like a spear. She did not twist him living around her face, but threw him coiled upon the path, upon which the greatest god wandered at ease through all his lands. The venerable gods stepped forth radiantly. The gods who served Pharaoh accompanied him. When he proceeded, as every day, the venerable worms stung him. The divine god opened his mouth, and the voice of his majesty echoed even to the sky. And the gods exclaimed, "Behold!" Thereupon he would not answer. His jaws chattered, all his limbs trembled, and a poison gripped his flesh, as the Nile seizes upon the land. In this hymn, Egypt has again preserved for us a primitive conception of a serpent's sting. The aging of the autumn sun as an image of human senility is symbolically traced back to the mother through the poisoning by the serpent. The mother is reproached because her malice causes the death of the sun god. The serpent, the primitive symbol of fear, illustrates the repressed tendency to turn back to the mother because the only possibility of security from death is possessed by the mother as the source of life. Accordingly, only the mother can cure him sink unto death, and therefore the hymn goes on to depict how the gods were assembled to take counsel. And Isis came with her wisdom. Her mouth is full of the breath of life, her words banish sorrow, and her speech animates those who no longer breathe. She said, "What is that? What is that, divine Father? Behold, a worm has brought you sorrow. Tell me thy name, divine Father, because the man remains alive who is called by his name." Whereupon Re replied, "I am he who created heaven and earth and piled up the hills, and created all beings thereon. I am he who made the water and caused a great flood, who produced the bowl of his mother, who is the procreator, etc. The poison did not depart, it went further. The great god was not cured. Then said Isis to Re, "Thine is not the name thou hast told me. Tell me true that the poison may leave thee, for he whose name is spoken will live." Finally, Re decides to speak his true name. He is approximately healed in perfect composition of Osiris, but he has lost his power, and finally he retreats to the heavenly cow. The poisonous worm is, if one may speak in this way, a negative phallus, a deadly, not an animating form of libido. Therefore, a wish for death instead of a wish for life. The true name is soul and magic power, hence a symbol of libido. What Isis demands is the retransference of libido to the mother goddess. This request is fulfilled literally, for the aged god turns back to the divine cow, the symbol of the mother. This symbolism is clear from our previous explanations. The onward urging living libido, which rules the consciousness of a son, demands separation from the mother. The longing of a child for the mother is a hindrance on the path to this, taking the form of a psychologic resistance which is expressed empirically in the neurosis by all manners of fears. That is to say, that the fear of life. The more a person withdraws from adaptation to reality and falls into slothful inactivity, the greater becomes his anxiety, cum grano salis, which everyone besets him at each point as a hindrance upon his path. The fear springs from the mother, that is to say, from the longing to go back to the mother, which is opposed to the adaptation to reality. This is the way in which the mother has become apparently the malicious pursuer. Naturally, it is not the actual mother, although the actual mother, with the abnormal tenderness with which she sometimes pursues her child, even into adult years, may gravely injure it through a willful prolonging of the infantile state in the child. It is rather the mother imago which becomes the lamia. The mother imago, however, possesses its power solely and exclusively from the son's tendency not only to look and to work forwards, but also to glance backward to the pampering sweetness of childhood, to that glorious state of irresponsibility and security of which the protecting mother care once surrounded him. The retrospective longing acts like a paralyzing poison upon the energy and enterprise, so that it may well be compared to a poisonous serpent which lies across our path. Apparently it is a hostile demon which robs us of our energy, but in reality it is the individual conscious, the retrogressive tendency of which begins to overcome the conscious forward striving. The cause of this can be, for example, the natural aging which weakens the energy, or it may be great external difficulties which cause man to break down, become a child again, or it may be, and this is probably the most frequent cause, the woman who enslaves a man so that he can no longer free himself and becomes a child again. It may be of significance also that Isis, as sister wife of the sun god, creates the poisonous animal from the spittle of the god, which is perhaps a substitute for sperm, and therefore is a symbol of libido. She creates the animal from the libido of the god. That means she receives his power, making him weak and dependent, so that by this means she assumes the dominating role of a mother. Mother transference to the wife. This part is preserved in the legend of Samson in the role of Delilah, who cut off Samson's hair, the sun's rays thus robbing him of his strength. Any weakening of the adult man strengthens the wishes of the unconscious. Therefore the decrease of strength appears directly as the backward striving towards the mother. There is still to be considered one more source of a reanimation of the mother imago. We have already met in the discussion of a mother scene in Faust, that is to say, the willed introversion of a creative mind, which retreating before its own problem and inwardly collecting its forces dip at least to a moment into the source of life, in order there to wrest a little more strength from a mother for the completion of its work. It is a mother-child's play with oneself in which lies much of weak self-admiration and self-adulation among 100 mirrors. A narcissus state, a strange spectacle perhaps for profane eyes. The separation from the mother imago, the birth out of oneself, reconcile all conflicts through the sufferings. This is probably meant by Nietzsche's verse. Why hast thou enticed thyself into the paradise of the old serpent? Why hast thou crept into thyself? A sick man now, sick of serpent's poison, a captive now, whom the hardest destiny befell its fine own pit. Bowed down as thou workest, and caved with thyself, burrowing into thyself, helpless, stiff, a corpse, overwhelmed with 100 burdens, overburdened by thyself, a wise man, a self-knower, the wiser Surah, thou soughtest the heaviest burden and foundest thou thyself. The symbolism of this speech is of the greatest riches. He is buried in the depths of self, as if in the earth, really a dead man who turned back to Mother Earth. A kind who is piled with 100 burdens and pressed down to death. The one who groaning bears the heavy burden of his own libido, of that libido which draws him back to the mother. Who does not think of a Tarophrian of Mithra, who took his bull according to the Egyptian hymn, the bull of his mother? That is, his love for his mother, the heaviest burden upon his back, and with that entered upon the painful course of the so-called transients. This path of passion led to the cave in which the bull was sacrificed. Christ, too, had to bear the cross, and symbol of his love for the mother, and he carried it to the place of sacrifice, where the lamb was slain in the form of God, the infantile man, a self-executioner, and then to burial in the subterranean sector. That which in Ezech appears as a poetical figure of speech is really a primitive myth. It is as if the poet still possessed a dim idea or capacity to feel and reactivate those imperishable phantoms of long-past worlds of thought in the words of our present-day speech, and in the images which crowd themselves into his fantasy. Hauptmann also says, poetic rendering is that which allows the echo of a primitive word to resound through the form. The sacrifice, with its mysterious and manifold meaning, which is rather hinted at than expressed, passes unrecognized in the unconscious of our author. The arrow is not shot, the hero Chiwetel is not yet fatally poisoned and ready for death through self-sacrifice. We now can say, according to the preceding material, this sacrifice means renouncing the mother, that is to say, renunciation of all bonds and limitations which the soul has taken with it from the period of childhood into the adult fire. From various hints of Miss Miller, it appears that at the time of these fantasies, she was still living in the circle of the family, evidently at an age which was in urgent need of independence. That is to say, man does not live very long in the infantile environment or in the bosom of the family without real danger to his mental health. Life calls him forth to independence, and he who gives no heed to this hard call, because of childish indolence and fear, is threatened by a neurosis. And once the neurosis is broken out, it becomes more and more a valid reason to escape the battle of life, and to remain for all time in a morally poisoned infantile atmosphere. The fantasy of the arrow wound belongs in this struggle for personal independence. The thought of this resolution has not yet penetrated the dreamer. On the contrary, she rather repudiates it. After all the preceding, it is evident that the symbolism of the arrow wound, through direct translation, must be taken as a coitus symbol. The ossicide mortitis attains by this means the sexual significance belonging to it. Chiwetel naturally represents the dreamer, but nothing is obtained and nothing is understood through one's reduction to the coarse sexual, because it is commonplace that the unconscious shelters coitus wishes, the discovery of which signifies nothing further. The coitus wish under this aspect is really a symbol of the individual demonstration of libido, separated from the parents of the conquest of an independent life. This step towards a new life means, at the same time, the death of the past life. Therefore, Chiwetel is the infantile hero, the son, the child, the lamb, the fish who is still enchained by the fetters of childhood, and who has to die as a symbol of the incestuous libido, and with that sever the retrogressive bond. For the entire libido is deemed for the battle of life, there can be no remaining behind. The dreamer cannot yet come to this decision, which will tear aside all the sentimental connections with father and mother, yet it must be made in order to follow the call to the individual destiny.